and welcome to the Journey to CEO Success podcast. I'm your co-host, Melissa Saunders, along with Patrick Thean, entrepreneur, CEO coach, and a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. His latest book, The Journey to CEO Success, is the inspiration for this show. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Melissa. It's a great
How are
day.
you doing? Yeah, it's a great day for our podcast, huh?
Yeah.
And we have a special treat for you today. Today's guest is Kevon Saber. He's a founding partner of Legacy Outcomes, which he created to protect and maximize the legacy of business owners during company sales. You guys, he is awesome. He is a two-time founder with exits to a Fortune 100 and private equity. He's also scaled GoCheck Kids into the leading vision screening platform for children. Kevon's ventures have generated, get this, over 70 million in sales and earned recognition from Silicon's 40 Under 40 and South by Southwest. Welcome, Kevon. How are you?
Thanks, Melissa. So good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on our show.
Well, Kevon, welcome to our show. It is such a treat to have you on here. And you know, we this show is really about helping CEOs have a joyful and successful life. And before we talk about your personal journey, you know, I would love for you to just take a minute and just share what you guys do at Legacy Outcomes.
Patrick, in a nutshell, we sell companies. We sell mid-sized companies, so 20 to 90 million in enterprise value, for more than the typical processes, with industry-leading success rates on whether the companies sell or not, and with zero conflicts of interest.
Well, you know, when we were getting to know each other the other day, I was really positively taken by something I read on your site about how, you know, founders leave money on the table, and you would love to help people not leave as much on the table as you left. So, you know, as part of this joyful and successful journey, a potential sale and outcome is part of that journey. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you guys do, and you know, take a few minutes and feel free to share how you help people actually make sure they leave less money on the table if they do an outcome.
Yeah, Patrick, all I'll do is I'll set the context or the table and say that we really reverse engineered from two different points, right? The first point is the gold standard, right? That's what Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, that's what Lazard will do for a 500 million or $1 billion enterprise value company. That doesn't work when you're looking at a mid-sized company, because you're talking about a smaller company, a smaller budget, a smaller enterprise value. The opposite side of the spectrum is what most founders experience. So 70 to 90% of founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, it doesn't matter if they started the company or if it's third generation, when they sell, they have regrets over how they sold. 70 to 90%.
Wow.
When you look at those odds, you of course say, I don't want to be a statistic, right?
Wow.
At the same time, when you look at why they have regrets, there's really a few factors. One, depending on the exact size of the company in that range, you're going to see between 65 and 80% of the companies that are trying to sell actually not sell. So the vast majority don't even sell. And those that do, most of them are selling way below the market value or the fair market value for the company. And so we say, okay, we know what Goldman, Lazard, and JP Morgan does for the bigger companies. We know what typically happens for companies that are south of $100 million in enterprise value. And what we've done is engineer a process that avoids all of the risks that result in those negative outcomes, while right-sizing the processes from Goldman, JP Morgan, and Lazard that work for a 20 to 90 million enterprise value company. That means we are avoiding the typical path to regrets, and we are walking the seller down what we call the seller's power path. So that really starts with understanding the objectives of the owner or owners. If there's more than one, we'll sit them in two different rooms. If it's just one, we'll sit them down and literally lay out 15 different objectives that a seller might have, right? Some of them are financial, some of them are not financial. We'll lay them out on the table, and really push them to defend why they think each of those priorities is a high, medium, or low priority, so that ultimately we understand what matters most to them. The rest
So,
of their plan. Go ahead, Patrick.
if I ask you a question real quick. So one of the regrets I'm sensing is that they didn't get the right priorities achieved. Maybe one of the regrets, is that why you're taking on this priority stuff?
Absolutely. It's a noisy time when you're selling a company because you're trying to fulfill your customer orders, you're managing your sales pipeline, you're still hiring, you're still firing, you're dealing with vendors. And at the same time, you have a lot of emotions associated with selling this company that might have been your professional life's work. It usually is something you have your identity tied to. You know that there's so many people that are counting on you, even if they have no idea that you're in the sale process.
Yeah.
And so this lack of clarity, Patrick, that you're pointing out as to what you're trying to achieve is a huge risk that eventually causes a lot of the owners to have regrets.
So it sounds like you are a combination. If I'm wrong, please correct me. This is a fun conversation we're having here, but it sounds like you're a combination of an investment banker to help sell the company, but at the same time, a coach to help them understand what the priorities are so they don't make the wrong decision, actually sell the company and go, why the heck did I do that? I would wish I could have done it differently, right?
Absolutely. We have a whole team that's selling each company. And to be very frank, some of them are not qualified to play that coach role. They have incredible technical skills. They're focused on identifying sources of value that are strategic or operational or financial that a buyer might care about. Some of them are incredible at combing earnings calls and annual reports and even communications between GPs and LPs to find out what do the buyers care about. But we have every single company we sell assigned to a transition architect. And the requirement to be a transition architect is you sold your own company for at least 8 figures, right?
Okay.
That is the person who is the coach, right? That is the person who's sitting with you, arm in arm, tied at the hip for the whole process, whether that's 8 months or 12 months in selling the company.
I think that's rather unique, by the way, that it's not just, getting an investment banker or broker to sell my company, but walking hand in hand or arm in arm, as you put it, with someone who has sold their company before. So tell me what you love most about what you do.
What we love most is helping business owners protect their legacy, right? And it's going to be different depending on the business owner. Some of them, they have particular charities that they can't wait to give large checks to when the business sale is complete. Others have a 5-generational financial and character building, even spiritual plan that they want to execute. That's going to take their mind share, but it's also going to take their dollars, right? There are others who say, you know what, I really want a buyer who's going to protect the culture, the values that we put in place, or a buyer who cares about the career ladders of the team that I've been building for the last 30 years. So this is part of uncovering what are their priorities, but then enabling them to achieve them in ways that they couldn't without us is so fulfilling.
Yeah. So, like you, not quite like you, because you've done this a lot more than I, but similar to you, I've sold to companies as well on my side. And I've found myself actually changing my priorities along that journey. In other words, I may start with, I want these things, but then as the journey went on, without realizing it, my priorities changed, but it wasn't intentional. And if I had someone next to me that said to me, hey, Patrick, do you realize that you've changed some of your priorities along this journey? I might have changed them back, but because nobody was there to tell me about that, I just kind of went along with my thought process. So do you see that often in founders or not founders, but folks selling companies?
Almost every time, Patrick. I mean, it's a lot like you sitting in Seattle right now saying, gosh, I want to go to Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
If that's your destination, there are 100 or 1,000 different adjustments that plane and the computer on the plane will make to make sure you get there, right? But if instead you say, hey, I want to go to Tokyo, and you have none of the instrumentation on the plane, and you have lots of people on the plane who are talking about where they want to go, right? You're not gonna probably end up in Tokyo. You might end up in Berlin. You might end up in Beijing. Maybe you'll end up in Taipei, but unlikely you'll be in Tokyo.
And do you find that some people change their priorities along the way as they learn more about the process, or do you find that people are pretty pretty clear on what they wanted to start with and they end up where they wanted to be?
So most business owners, if we spend enough time, at which we require, debating the different possibilities for their priorities up front, they don't change because they really have thought about it. They have weighed those priorities against each other. We've had a lot of conversations about why they prioritize each one, and then they don't change. However, if we don't do that deep, really priority diligence up front, then they will inevitably change because of all of the different pressures and concerns and emotions that they're faced with. It's a barrage, right? Through
Yeah.
through the process. And so what we do is we'll look at the priorities every month and say, are these still the right priorities? If not, it's okay. We can make an adjustment. But remember, we have a whole playbook, right? Through 6 different phases that we're tailoring for the objectives. And so if they change, we need to know so we can adjust the playbook.
Yeah. So if our clients and if our friends watching this podcast want to get in touch with you and learn more about your process, how do they do that, Kevon?
There's a variety of ways. So legacyoutcomes.com is our website. We have a page there where they can tell us a little bit about their company so we can come to the conversation with a prepared mind. They can also reach out to us or reach out to me on Twitter or X now at Kevon Saber, KEVON SABER. It's like Kevin with an O, and then Saber is like Saber Cat. And then I'm also on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. So let me switch over to talk about your journey now, because would love to talk about your journey. And before Legacy Outcomes, you started and GoCheck Kids, and you've sold 2 businesses already. So of yourself personally. So how did you tell us about your journey? How did you do this? Like, when did you become an entrepreneur, and what made you do that?
Okay, so I think I have to take you back to when I was 8 years old.
Yes.
I wanted to do a tennis camp at the local municipal tennis facility. This was a city-run 18-court complex in Fremont, California, which is, of course, part of Silicon Valley, right across from Palo Alto. You just cross the Dumbarton Bridge and right next to San Jose. Well, my dad said to me, Kevon, how are you going to pay for it? And I said, well, I don't know. I kind of was hoping that you would.
With your money, Daddy. Right?
And he said, well, think about it. And so I thought about it. We had a conversation or two. And the next thing I knew, we were at Costco looking at candy bars, understanding how much they each cost when you buy them in bulk, and then how much could I actually charge for them. So I figured I could charge $1 each. I was going to pay about 30 cents each, so I'd make 70% per bar. So that was my first introduction to gross margin, right? And then I was literally on the streets of Fremont, Milpitas, and even Palo Alto, which was where my dad's office was. I would stand on the street and say, would you like to buy a candy bar so I can go to tennis camp? Well, that paid for my tennis camp. It paid for my stereo. It paid for my, at the time, audio cassette tapes, my Air Jordan shoes. I had discretion, right? I connected the dots, thanks to my dad, between hard work and acquiring what was important to me. And I, of course, never lost that bug. My parents were small business owners. They had a printing company in Palo Alto. Fast forward to the time I was 22, I only had one example with my parents, and that was their small business ownership. They had a small printing company that grew up around the growth of Silicon Valley. So they were printing for Sun Microsystems and Intuit and a lot of the first large tech companies. At 20 years old, as a sophomore in college, I would look at the Wall Street Journal and see 18 to 23-year-olds becoming .com millionaires on a regular basis. And I thought, gosh, that sounds fantastic. Why couldn't I do that? And so I started a .com company in my dorm room with 3 friends. Shortly after that, the .com bust happened, but we had already caught the entrepreneurship bug, right? We were already almost a year into the venture. Of course, at that point, it wasn't popular to invest in starry-eyed entrepreneurs anymore. So we had to figure out a model to get cash flow positive quickly. We did that through advertising, which was not the original model for the company, which was e-commerce sales. And then, after that, I never looked back. I spent the rest of my career building companies.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So share with us, you've gone through a lot here. If you've actually gone through raising capital. Tell us a little bit about your thought process. Why did you raise capital, and as you reflect back, what lessons could you share with our audience?
My perspective on raising capital has changed a lot over time. I used to think that it was the only way or the default way to build a company because that's what was normal around me in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And I do think there are very good reasons to raise capital. If you have a time-sensitive market opportunity, you need to hire a meaningfully sized team, right, that has skills that you don't have yourself, or you have a competition that's creating that urgency, then certainly there's a lot of logic to raise capital. How I think about that differently, though, today than the past is twofold. The first is aligned investors or investors who share my values, right? Those investors are going to be influencing the decisions that I'm making on a day-to-day basis that affect the employees, the customers, the vendors, the culture that we're building. And so if my investors have a different set of values than I have, we're going to have a constant dissonance because back to our earlier part of our conversation, we have different priorities. The other thing that I have a different view on today compared to my early days in my 20s, I'm 45 now, is there are a lot of other ways to finance a company. And instead of just putting the blinders on and assuming I have to take a certain path, which is raising venture capital, and now I encourage entrepreneurs to take a step back and ask themselves, what are the various ways I might finance this company? And there are many. There's non-dilutive funding that comes from various agencies. There's, of course, financing it through revenue or through the gross margin that comes from serving customers. There's ways to monetize your skills in ways that are helping you learn about the market and the customers that you're serving, but might be a little different product than you eventually are selling. For example, you might do some labor consulting that ultimately you turn into a software product.
That's right.
I know you have some experience with, Patrick.
Yes. Because I started my first company in the early 90s, 1991. During that time, so I've actually seen the whole funding world change multiple times. So back when I had Medisys, you could not. It was very rare. I shouldn't say you could not, but it was very rare to do startup capital. So we funded our companies really for the scaling aspect. So VCs would provide, and we didn't even call them private equity in those days, it was venture capitalists, and they would basically fund companies that had a proven model that they could scale. And then, of course, the whole .com journey I went through as well. And I saw, hey, it's okay, an idea is good enough and we'll fund it. And then went through that phase of life, right? So yeah, I've seen different funding cycles. And I learned along the way that selling stock is actually the most expensive way to fund a company. Well, that's anyway my perspective. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but given all my experience, my own personal journey, I've concluded that selling stock is actually the most expensive way to fund a company, because whatever stock you sold for $1 today, if you were successful, it's probably worth $1,000 tomorrow, right? And therefore, anyway, so that's kind of my perspective.
The other way that it's really expensive is it is an enterprise sales process, and you end up running multiple sales processes in the same time, which means that you're not spending as much time acquiring customers and building that team, right?
One of the guys I know, he used to, Sanjeev was the CEO of I2 Technologies. This is back in the early days, and he took his company public. It was amazing. He took his company public, and I asked him. I said, Sanjeev, you still own a lot of your company. That's amazing, because he didn't go through the venture capital stuff, and his company was a few years earlier than mine. And I asked him why. He said, because nobody would give me money. He said it was so hard to raise capital. It was actually easier making a sale to a customer. And he said sale after sale after sale. And suddenly, we went public. So it's funny how the world has so shifted in many ways. Now having.
Well, can I say one more thing about that, Patrick? It's also a pure sales cycle because it keeps the company totally honest to the value and the benefits that the customers care about. When you have customers and investors, unless they're amazing investors, and there are many of those, but there are many who are not. That's why you need to be so careful. You end up with two masters that are pulling in two different directions.
Yes.
Which ultimately sets you up to end up with a worse outcome, because the customer, you didn't build the whole company around the customer.
Yeah, and you're right, so right about getting the right investors. You pointed on the whole values piece. I would also say that in the early days we used to say there's money and there's smart money, and smart money would help us get better. And I remember, I was very fortunate. I actually got funded by Insight Capital, which was they were small at that time. Today they're big. Today they're a mega, multi-billion-dollar, very successful venture.
I have a lot of friends there.
Yeah. Okay. So I was funded by them, and they were really smart money. They taught me a lot. I remember explaining my business model to them in the early days, and they said to me, Patrick, you're a smart guy, but your business model is too complicated. And I defended it. I was like, no, it's a good business model, blah, blah, blah. And they said, Patrick, would you rather take 10 minutes explaining your business model to me, because that's what you did? Or would you rather take 10 minutes explain the value of your company to me and to your customers? And I thought about it right there. I said, damn, I got to change my thing so that I don't take 10 minutes to talk about my business model. That should be 1 minute, because the value needs to be on the customer stuff. So I was very fortunate because I had a venture partner that really taught me stuff. I was very young. I was like 28 years old at that time. So I was very, very young. So share with me,
when I restarted GoCheck Kids, I
Yeah.
called Annika Agarwal, who is a private equity veteran and a partner there. She's also an expert in SaaS. And of course, at that time, this is back in 2017, Insight was doing a lot of SaaS deals. I think they're probably doing a lot of them still today, but probably even more AI deals. And like your conversation with them, I said, hey, Annika, here's how I'm thinking about the unit economics of this business. And she said, okay, here's how we think about it differently. And she gave me a lot of really practical advice that actually enabled us to scale a lot faster. I think you might have mentioned earlier on this conversation that we 100x the equity value of GoCheck over those 5 years. I have to give some of that credit to Annika at Insight for pointing me in the direction of the specific unit economics that investors would appreciate most.
So in my book, The Journey to CEO Success, the 7 key practices I share there. One of them is about having the right people ecosystem around you. And a lot of people think about their employees mainly when they think about ecosystem. But when I think of the people ecosystem around you, with your employees, your customers, your shareholders, your vendors, but also your private equity funders, if you've chosen to go that route. And I think we've both had the great fortune of having the right ones that have taught us so many things there.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a team, right? You've heard the phrase, teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes.
And, I don't care how smart somebody is. If you can have 5 people with complementary thinking, where you can get uncommon knowledge on the table and an honest process to determine not how do we do my idea, but what is the very best idea, no question, you're talking about probably moving at a rate that is 3 to 5 times faster than if you're just going off of the intuition of a smart person.
So tell me, in your journey, what have you done to help yourself when you got yourself into a not so happy place, right? Because running a business or from a startup to where you got it to, not every day is a great day. We try and make every day a great day, but I'm sure there were some dark days. And what did you do to help yourself go from those dark days to positive days again, and to be successful and recapture the joy that you may have lost along the way?
That's a great question, and it's a hard question. There are a few things that are coming to mind right now. The first is recognizing that my self-worth is not tied up in the equity value of the company. It's not tied up in my own financial net worth. It's not tied up in our growth rate, right, as an organization. It is based on eternal factors that are unchangeable, right? They're unshakable. And so I don't need to worry about feeling inferior because something is not going the way I planned or hoped on a day or a week or even a quarter, right? Another thing that is, I think, incredibly important that entrepreneurs forget is that as fun and fulfilling as building a business is, there are actually more fulfilling things in life, right? Uh, Especially relationships. And so I prioritize today my most important relationships, just a handful, right? That I can count on one hand, more than I do how fast is any of those metrics, those business metrics or financial metrics improving. I think it's really helpful actually to have a balanced view, right? Not an overly optimistic Pied Piper view or a overly dour or half glass full view. And so I think just taking stock of the situation and say, what's going well? What am I grateful for? And what do we need to improve on if we're going to achieve whatever our mission is at the same time, enables an entrepreneur to stay really grounded. Those are the first three things that come to mind.
Thank you. Those are all wonderful, wonderful jewels there that I hope our audience is taking good notes on. I think I've seen too many entrepreneurs or business owners have their identity all wrapped up in the company. And so when the company has a bad day, they have a bad day. And when the company has a great day, they have a great day, which I would say, as part of what you do also at Legacy Outcomes, one of the things that entrepreneurs have to do when they sell their businesses is they have to figure out that they're not their company. Because I still remember when I sold my first company, I was 32 or 33, and I had that, what do you call that? I had that post Super Bowl depression, I got sold, it was a great victory. I'm sitting there with my wife and I say to her, I say, hey, I'm useless now. For whatever reason, I just felt that way. I just felt that depression. I was like, what am I supposed to do now? I'm just useless, because my identity was the company, and I didn't realize that. So I was feeling all these emotions, and I sure hope that at Legacy Outcomes that your coaching helps people through that, or rather help them understand that that's what they may feel if they are tied, if their joy and their identity is tied totally to the company.
Patrick, I'm writing a book right now because there are a lot more business owners that we want to help than we can actually help with our time, right? Yes. And there's a chapter on emotions. Probably a third of the chapter is what you just said. It's all about understanding where you find your identity so that when you do sell the company, you don't feel that hopelessness, that uselessness. I was talking to one of the leading wealth managers in the Southeast. His firm manages about $10 billion of assets, and a lot of that is for entrepreneurs. And he said the saddest days of anyone's life that he sees are the year after an entrepreneur sells their company. If they didn't state a mission for their time post-sale before they sold. You're making me think of a quick story. I was 24. I had just left my first company. We didn't actually sell that one. I left because my co-founder and I realized we had very different values, and we were going to tear the company apart if we tried to pursue different ends under the same roof. I was driving from San Francisco to Vancouver for a family reunion / vacation. And it was in between leaving the first company and starting the next company. About 5 hours into the drive, I felt so blue, so down, and I just could not understand why. I was going on vacation, right? Yeah. I was going to spend time with people I care about. I was going to enjoy a new city. I love traveling. But as I just processed on that long car ride, I realized that, like you said for yourself, I just felt like I didn't have any sense of worth, because I was no longer this celebrated entrepreneur on the covers of magazines, featured on TV. I was just Kevon in a car driving with my family. And that wasn't enough for me. So I knew that had to change.
Yeah. Well, Kevon, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh my goodness, so many good nuggets here. Create your identity, be strong within yourself so that it's not just tied only to your company. So when you sell a company, it's like, I'm nothing now, right? You're something. God made you. You have a purpose here. Thank you. So my last question is always, this podcast is about helping CEOs have a joyful and successful life. What advice can you leave our audience for them to have the best journey for this joyful and successful life?
Patrick, one exercise I found really useful, as morbid as it sounds, is actually to write my obituary.
Hmm.
What do I want? What do I hope people will say at my funeral or celebration of life? Because if I can have that end in mind, then I can actually curate and design my whole life toward that end, right? Uh, I imagine that my wife will be so shaken that she may not want to talk, right? She's more of an introvert. So I just thought, what do I want my kids to say? And they talked about the kind of impact that I had through my work, the kind of impact that I had as a father, and the kind of impact that they, saw me have as just a member of my community. For example, the neighborhoods that we lived in, right? And I take that out about once a year and I read it and just ask, to what extent am I living up to these values? And it's always a imperfect pursuit, right? And of course, just like someone's priorities while they're selling their company might change, sometimes I change the obituary and say, you know what, I have a little different view on that now. But I think if one can work backwards from, again, the end in mind, then they can make choices that are consistent with their values, whether they're in a season of building a company, selling a company, or figuring out what they're going to do next.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Kevon.
Yeah,
you.
Kevon. Wow. What a journey from selling candy bars so that you could pay for a camp as a kiddo to now what I know is going to be a best-selling author. That was amazing. And I hope our people who listen to us, our subscribers, got so much out of that. That was really amazing. So thank you for being with us today. And thanks, Patrick, for leading such a great discussion.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you both so much. It's been an absolute joy to be with you, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful for the ways that you're supporting entrepreneurs and business leaders.
Wow. Yeah. I think the part about writing your obituary so you really know how to live life is amazing. So go out there, live your life. Bye now.